tears aren't coming. The tears just aren't coming.
Okay.
Just to be clear, it looks like he's dead or he is dead.
It just looks like he's dead. He's got, like, blue paint on him or something. But he's going to be fine.
What is wrong with you?
Doctor!
So here on the channel yesterday, I had my good friend Eric Breen come in. We talked about some of the current storylines for Captain Marvel, where they're moving to the character. I teased that we were going to be doing this today, and I think that there's not like overwhelming evidence, but we certainly have enough circumstantial evidence or enough information out there or an idea that perhaps Marvel is sabotaging some writers' careers by going there and working there. When we see them leave Marvel, what appear to be trash writers that have no future in the industry, they go over to DC, they go over to Boom, go over to Image, and next thing you know, you read their comics, and it feels like you're reading a completely different writer. And now I've also heard from behind the scenes that some writers, when they're at Marvel and they're putting on certain titles where the agenda is clearly being pushed in the title, I have been told by those creators or people that are familiar with those creators that when they submit their scripts, it will be much more action-focused or much more in line with a traditional version of that character. And then they get the feedback from Marvel, it's that, no, we don't want you doing action. We want you leaning into this thing. And a lot of the times it ends up being the very thing that fans kind of turn on the series and even turn on the writer. And it feels like a lot of times it might not actually be the writer's fault. It might just be Marvel, their editorial staff and management. Obviously here to talk with me about that is my good friend, the guy that's so cool they call him the Brain, the comic book hoarder himself, Eric Breen. How you doing?
Doing great.
Well, I'm glad that you could make it, my friend. I hope a lot of people are going to be enjoying this one. And I do want to say, if you haven't subscribed, what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Give us a thumbs up. Give us a thumbs down. Either way, we want to hear your comments. Do you agree with us? Is Marvel intentionally or unintentionally sabotaging the careers of young creators like Tom Taylor, Mariko Tamaki? Those are the two examples that we're going to use today because they currently are working at DC Comics, and it feels like different writers. Now, we'll go with Exhibit A. Mariko Tamaki, when she came into the industry, she was doing like LGBTQ-centric graphic novels, for a younger audience. She was picked up by Marvel, and next thing you know, she's writing She-Hulk, and she's a food blogger. She's also wrote I believe, an X-23 series that was really bad. And it feels like, why would you hire this person? They're completely incompetent. But now we see her over at DC Comics. By all measures, her Wonder Woman series was perfectly fine. Her little short run on Wonder Woman was good. And what she's doing on Dark Detective with Bruce Wayne, she's obviously going to be the writer on Detective Comics. It feels like a different writer. It feels like she's somewhat action-focused. We don't see food and really stupid conversations going on all the time. It feels like it's character-focused. What the hell is going on there, Bree? Do you think it's an intentional part on Marvel's problem where they're kind of sabotaging these creators and ruining their creative potentials?
I'm going to say yes and no. Marvel, of the big two in the last several years, has definitely leaned heavier into promoting social issues or social justice issues, or basically trying to make their comics more of a reflection of the real world. Remember the old saying, Marvel is the world outside your window?
Mm-hmm.
And where I look at and say they need to board that window up. But their take is we want our larger than life characters. How would they be if they were existing in today's world with today's problems or just today's everyday life? So with Tom Taylor with X-Men Red, it was subtle as a flying mallet. With Mariko Tamaki on X-23, I remember having an 8-year-old girl questioning her sexuality became a part of the book. And then over in She-Hulk, it was basically, like I said, a food blog. Now, I don't know if this is just the natural inclination of the writers, and Marvel allowed them more freedom to be closer to who they really are. And then when they get to DC, they're more of a comic book character centric universe. So they're kind of reined in a little bit. Like, I I know that Tom Taylor did Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man also. Now, I didn't read the book, but I saw enough reviews to know it absolutely was not my cup of tea.
It was awful.
Then I've never read The Injustice, but Deceased is as good as anything I've read in the last couple of years. And I have read the 2 Tamaki Dark Detectives. And whereas I'm going to say they're good, I'm not going to say they're as good as what Peter J. Tomasi could have rolled out.
But they're perfectly competent. They are pretty good Batman stories.
Yeah, I said, and now part of that might be the work we have to compare it to at Marvel was so bad that just competent to good is going to look very good.
At Marvel, competent to good superhero writing would stand out among the crowd there as well.
Oh, so, no question. Yeah, and so I don't know if it's I don't know who is the real Tom Taylor and who the real Mariko Tamaki is. I think we're going to find out on Nightwing because he's using Barbara Gordon, and if we get Cecile Castellucci's version, I think that might be a good hint of who the real Tom Taylor is. But as far as Marvel, sabotaging the careers there, no, I think it's more of they have agendas they want to push, and they get creators that will help them do that. And I don't know if at the time if you want to work for us, you've got to insert this into your book. But I don't know.
I've been told that's what it is. Like, I don't know specifically about Mariko Tamaki or Tom Taylor, but I have been told in the case of other writers, when they submitted their scripts, the feedback was, this is like too action-oriented. This is action storytelling. That's not what we're trying to achieve with this series. We want you to lean into this like social issue more in this because that's what we want this series to cover. And it ended up, essentially taking, some careers like that.
Yeah, I guess another couple examples could be Jeremy Whitley with Unstoppable Wasp and Sanaa Grace on Iceman, but I don't think they had to push either one of those two very far because I think their work and other examples of their work kind of fits what they did in those books. So I'm not
Jeremy
sure.
Whitley is essentially like a death sentence for any series. As soon as his name goes on it, it's canceled in 4 or 5 issues.
I mean, what you're going to get when he does a book, and so
nobody wants it.
Yeah, I don't know if it's so much, Marvel sabotaging. If these the people that they're getting to do these, some of them are good enough to be better when they get to a place that doesn't put as much emphasis on, like I said, issues versus telling good comic book adventure stories. So I think that might explain why Tom Taylor and Mariko Tamaki seem to be light years better at DC than at Marvel.
Yeah, you take in Deceased. Now, it's not, a flash in the pan. He did Deceased. Excellent. Some of the best character moments that we've read at DC in quite some time. I'll get to that more in a minute. He's had, he's had a one-shot. It's good. He had a prequel series. It was good. He had a digital prequel series. It was good. He had the sequel series. It was even better. Not as good as the original, but Dead Planet's good. He's got he's got a body of work at DC Comics now that kind of proves that what happened over at Marvel either was a fluke or he just had terrible editorial oversight. When we go in there and you read Tom Taylor's Deceased, and I'm sure there are people that won't read it because they've read his Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man or his X-Men Red, and they're like, I don't trust anybody on Tom Taylor again. If you go and read that, you will see some of the best Superman moments that feel true to the character. You will see some of the best Batman moments that feel true to the character. You will see other characters, more obscure characters in the DC universe that feel like they're treated with the respect, that they've earned over time. That when you see them in other, kind of big name DC writers, they aren't treated that way. He seemed to have a reverence for the characters, their history, and it's really being celebrated in that series. And it's brilliant because of that. How come that didn't translate over to Marvel? It had to be on purpose.
Well, okay, you just brought up something. So DC still has a reverence for their characters, and and you can insert a cheap shot of future state here, but we know that 6 months down the road, all the characters that we were reading 6 months ago will be back in various forms and probably look a lot like they did 6 months ago. Marvel doesn't seem to have that anymore. They seem to
Do they have a disdain for their own character legacies? It almost feels like it sometimes.
Maybe not the characters, the mantles they represent, but the fact that they were almost exclusively, I hate to say, straight white men, and that's why you saw all of them kind of taken out of their positions and replaced with minority characters, and with the belief that it doesn't matter who is the Hulk as long as there's a Hulk. Now that was pretty roundly rejected by readers, and so they had to bring them back. But a lot of and again, a lot of it comes down to who's writing it. Right now, Spider-Man feels like Spider-Man. The last handful of issues of Nick Spencer's Spider-Man could fit in any of the eras from the 45 years I've been reading. Well, 35 years because I quit about 10 years ago during Slot. But it would fit in in between a Jerry Conway and a Roger Stern run.
Daredevil feels like Daredevil.
Yeah, Chip Zdarsky feels now. It feels more like Netflix Daredevil, but it feels like the character. Mm-hmm. So, and it's a hell of a story. So, I mean, we just mentioned the 2 Marvel books I read on a regular basis. But I said, I read Avengers for decades. Jason Aaron's Avengers do not feel like that. The characters don't feel like the characters I know. I've heard nice things about Slot's Fantastic Four. But I mean, I just, they don't have the same feel, at least at DC. And again, even when they're written by characters or writers that don't have a good track record over at Marvel, they at least feel more like the characters. So I think it's more of almost like an overall company philosophy that Marvel has enacted in the last 5 or 6 years. That as opposed to
like terrible, Mariko Tamaki has a bad reputation, and we're starting to see some evidence that might not be the case as far as superhero comics. She seems to have ability and the want to and the drive to do it when properly motivated. Tom Taylor had a bad reputation. He's certainly cleaned that up quite a bit with his work over at DC Comics. How many other quality writers are sitting over there and just dying on the vine over at Marvel Comics because of a lack of oversight, leadership, and editorial services to help them and help them grow and prove that they're good writers?
I think a great example of that is Chip Zdarsky. I think he just woke up between issues of Spectacular Spider-Man and said,
yes,
I can do better than this. And it was one of the most amazing, I said, the 2 most amazing one issue to issue improvements I've ever seen was Zdarsky between those 2 issues of Spectacular Spider-Man and whatever Max Visaggio wrote before Ginny Hex. It's almost like and Zdarsky did it staying at Marvel. It's almost like he said, well, I'm just going to start doing good stuff and see if Marvel notices. And it still hasn't got him put on a truly flagship title, and I'm starting to think that he might be closer like Marvel's version of Robert Venditti, that whatever he does is going to be very, very good, but it's not going to be a top seller. Unfortunately, Daredevil
never going to be promoted as one of their flagship.
Slot's Amazing Spider-Man was outselling Zdarsky's like 2.5 to 1, and Zdarsky's book was at least 2.5 times better.
Yeah, if you go and read Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man, that first volume that Zdarsky wrote, it's borderline unreadable. And by borderline, I mean it is unreadable.
Yeah.
The jokes are awful. The pacing is weird. It doesn't feel like Peter Parker. And then all of a sudden, it was just like, oh, wow, this is perfect.
But
once they hit volume 2.
But is it possible? Do you remember the issue, like one issue when he goes to a restaurant and he's got his Spider-Man costume and a dinner jacket over it? It just looked so ridiculous. And then 2 issues later, he's riding on Riri Williams' back while they're flying somewhere, and he's going, "Oh, can I have your autograph for a friend?" And it's, now I'm sure at that time Marvel was far more invested in Riri Williams as Iron Man than Peter Parker as Spider-Man. That's just the way they're doing things these days. And it's maybe Zdarsky said, "I'm not doing shit anymore. I'm going to start doing what I know I can do." So he might have just done it in spite of what he was told. I don't know that we'll ever know, but yeah, that's. And then now we're going to see what he can do at DC. But yeah, some guys have to make their own decisions, I guess. Some of them are, go along to get along, whatever Marvel tells them to do, which it might be what Taylor at Marvel was, and maybe Tamaki. Although I don't know that she had to be coerced into turning the She-Hulk into a food blog book, because she does seem to like her food references and stories, no matter where she.
Absolutely, if you read a Mariko Tamaki book, you are going to get a food reference. Even the Dark Detective, you got the French fry scene. Whatever. Here we go again, and then it turns out it's a pretty decent comic book. But I don't know. That's what editorial's there for you to do. That's what leadership and management are there to do for you, is to kind of save you from yourself sometimes. Sometimes you have a direction that's pretty good, but then you add some things onto it. It's like, no, we don't need this. You need to concentrate on this part of the character, because you're throwing this crap in there that people aren't going to respond to, and they're going to resent the story for it. And it feels like they don't get the editorial oversight that they probably deserve. And, that's how you don't develop writers. If you don't want to get developed, it feels like you go over to Marvel and you can just sit there and never improve as a writer. Whereas even with DC at their current state, we know their editorial services were essentially gutted. It feels like when people go over there, they develop, unless you're Tom King.
Yeah. I was thinking, could you imagine 30, 40 years ago, or let's say, Jim Shooter's writing the Korvac saga, and editorial steps in and goes, no, this there's too much action here. I want Moondragon to turn to the camera and lecture the other team members. And that would have been, well, A, it would never have happened, but B, it seems like, I can't imagine that we ever got to a point where it said, no, less action, more lecture. But that's what it does seem like happens at Marvel. Now, again, you brought up at DC. Going forward, one of the problems that Marvel's had during these years is you get what you pay for. Now, Marvel used to have, in the 70s, they had great writers, and a lot of them were allowed to edit their own books, but a lot of them were editing each other's books. So if you've got Len Wein editing Steve Englehart, you're going to get quality. If you've got someone you've never heard of making $36,000 working in New York City, editing a writer whose page rate is an insult, what do you really expect? So if they do have any editorial oversight, you might be getting the views of a 20-something who has grown up on Twitter and in places where she hasn't really learned about the world, just learned about the world as it's presented to her by one set of sources.
Well, I think the editorial oversight might be spell check. And did you need two sugars with that coffee? I think that might be what editorial services kind of are right now at Marvel Comics. That's kind of the feeling I get, that they're just not providing real services there when they go, hey, listen, I understand you want to do this with the character, but it's distracting from the main plot point here. It's not going to fit this time. Run with this. You need to cut this part out because it's not working for your story. Or adding this onto the character doesn't work because of the character's history. This happened. So you really can't do that with this character. Cut that part off. That's what editorial oversight it should be doing. But I think it's spell check and grammar.
Yeah, because if you're paying someone $36,000 at age 23 or whatever,
well, and they've never read
there's
books.
no way
they have classes on 3-act storytelling. They might not just be equipped to do it.
And they wouldn't even know where to begin to find out what characters have done in their past to tell a writer you can't do that. So I think instead of that, they just kind of create new character histories for this book, and I've said for years, if Marvel had just said when All New, All Different started, if that was the beginning of this Marvel universe, it wouldn't have made me want to read any of the stuff anymore, but at least it would have solved a lot of their problems, because then you wouldn't have, well, this character would never act like that. Yeah, but this new universe version of him does. And it could have straightened out a lot of the problems that they've had, and made the way these modern versions of the characters. Well, that's how it is now. And then going back to our previous video, Captain Marvel. Okay, there's all that other stuff that didn't happen to this Captain Marvel, so she is, stop complaining about it, because this version of her is the way she's always been in this universe.
Always been perfect.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting. We know that DC have kind of changed the way they're doing business. They no longer have exclusive. They're going to be longtime DC creators might go and dip their toe in Marvel Comics, and it could be interesting. Not only just seeing what they put out over there, but maybe hearing what they have to say in a few years when they take a step back. I think we're going to find out that there's a serious lack of editorial oversight, and that is causing a lot of the issues. And it's one of the reasons that Marvel isn't developing a lot of really good writers. There are a couple of writers that are anomalies. Chip Zdarsky, Donny Cates, apparently Tom Taylor when he's not at Marvel. Apparently Mariko Tamaki when they're not at Marvel. Apparently they do have some. They got some chops, but you wouldn't know it from their work at Marvel. I think we're going to start learning that Marvel is essentially absent at the wheel. They have been for a long time.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I don't think it's going to get a whole lot better with Kevin Feige in charge of both, because he's going to turn, at best, the comics are going to even more resemble the movies, which doesn't get being a monthly comics should give you more time to develop the characters, but I don't I think it's just going to be more I don't know just movie friendly versions, and what that means as far as like getting good writing back in there, or lack of editorial oversight, I don't know. And I don't know how important that's going to even be to them going forward. So again, kind of looking to DC, say, if you want to poach the few good Marvel writers, but that's probably not going to happen, because they've let a lot of the good writers they have go. So I don't know. And I know I'm getting way off topic, so reel me back in, Wes.
It's all good. I think we had a good conversation here. Like I said, I think we're going to get some answers to this in the not too distant future. Obviously, it's not going to be tomorrow, but we will probably discuss it again once we hear from somebody. Some people are going to talk eventually about their time, at DC versus Marvel, and I think it's going to be a very, two very different run companies, because that's what it feels like when we see creators like Mariko Tamaki and Tom Taylor when they move between the two companies. Obviously, Brian Bendis appears to have gotten worse at DC, and Tom King appeared to become a worse writer when he left his Vision series and went over to DC. But those also appear to be anomalies. I think they just might have. I don't know. Everybody's got a creative peak. I think they passed theirs.
I would have to agree with that.
I want to say thank you very much, my good friend, and obviously we'll be talking geek stuff here next week as well. Appreciate it.
Sounds good. Looking forward to it.